Landis Jackson to my left in the red jacket, who got up at 3:30 in the morning with the rest of us and drove. We all drove together from Calgary, is a colleague and a good companion of HR in a box. Landis is a human resource generalist with a number of years of experience. I'm not going to read the bio, you have it. And Landis has been doing HR in a box with us now for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And in her spare time, she teaches at Bow Valley College and at the University of Calgary, a continuing education. We work both as instructors there as well. Landis' experience in HR is an extremely well-rounded one, and so again, I think that we're all very fortunate to have Landis with us. So we're going to kick off with Landis talking about layoffs, impact, consequences, leading into then what Pam is going to address, which is one of the unintended consequences that can occur when there are layoffs. My understanding is that Medicine Hat is quite fortunate in that you are now on the upside of the very unfortunate situation that we have been living in Calgary. We had another announcement yesterday, unfortunately, about 1,000 people that are going to be let go between Houston and Calgary in the oil and gas industry. So kudos to Medicine Hat, kudos to all of you, because that's thanks to you. And Landis, if you would like to take it away.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nicole. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Good to see you. So as Nicole indicated, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of layoffs. You have a handout in your brochure, I believe, which is the copy of the PowerPoint slides. And so with that, I would like to get started this morning. First of all, when you heard the topic of impact of layoffs, any particular niggling topic that you thought, I hope we cover that in the session today? Or about harassment or bullying, anything so that Pam and I can ensure that we are addressing all of your questions or your needs, that type of thing?
With the harassment and bullying, I'm looking for that fine line between being like an assertive manager versus harassment.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Okay then, let's get started. So before we get talking about the actual layoff, I always like to bring some strategic HR concepts into our conversation. And therefore, I'd like to have conversation about when you make the decision to downsize. What drives that? From there, we're going to follow or go into a process that you should be following, ensuring that you are meeting the best practices, particularly in Alberta, talking a bit about the costs associated, different ways of handling layoffs, and then lastly, the impact on the organization. So with termination, before you actually sit down and have the conversation with the individual that may in fact be let go, is you need to do some planning. So your workforce plan is important. It will touch every piece of your HR practices throughout the year. What does that workforce plan focus on? What does it address? What does it talk about? It's where you start to look at what are we doing this coming year with our people? How many people do we need to have in each of these positions? And should we still have those positions? It's a point for you to step back from what you're doing, because you'll find that sometimes we get on that treadmill and we never step back and say, why? Why do we have these positions? Is it effective? Should we update these positions? What do we need to do? That's all part of your workforce plan. Okay? Are we getting the work done? Are we encouraging our employees to develop? And then what skill sets do we have in our organization? Part of that planning process is We want to align our people needs with our business. So where are we going as a business? And that's when HR becomes that business partner. Sitting down with the senior management team and saying, where and what do we need our people to be doing to ensure that we are being competitive, that we're being profitable, and that we are engaging and developing our staff. Once you've made the decision that some positions have to be terminated, then you've got to start doing some planning. It's not an exercise where you just wake up in the morning and think this person's going to be asked to leave the organization. You've got to do some planning and do some preparation. During the termination process, some concepts that I want to address with you is this documentation, and the most important thing is handling that person professionally. They are a person. We are affecting their life, and we want to be treating them with respect. It's utmost, I think. It speaks well to you as an organization when you get thinking about it from that perspective. And then following the termination, how do you deal with the people that are left? Because that also is a stressful situation. The individuals that are left in the organization, trust me, they're posing two questions to themselves. Am I the next one? And they're watching the HR team and the senior managers as to how are they dealing with this situation. How was the communication given to us? When were we told that the individual will no longer be here? How was it shared with everyone in the organization? And more importantly, who's doing the work? So those are all pieces that we'll talk about this morning when we have 50 minutes. So many of you have been involved in downsizing? How many of you have actually sat across the table and had to tell someone that their job is no longer there? 3 of you? Share those experiences with us if you don't mind. If you could redo that situation, that experience, what would you do differently? Sorry, I don't know your names. I can't.
Sorry.
Rhonda, can you share this?
It's just an uncomfortable position anyway, you look at it. It's hard. It's hard. You look at them, every situation differently, and try to improve. That's about all.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I think when we experienced it, it was due to a financial decision and the financial impacts on the organization. So I think everybody understood why it needed to be done. It's not easy, and it's
Right.
not an easy situation to address, but I don't think there would have been anything that it would have changed in our
Okay.
process.
Okay. Good. Great. Oh, you got a mic?
In my case, it was a total restructuring of an organization, so there was an awful lot of actual positions that were no longer necessary.
Okay.
So it was a very difficult situation, but necessary, to your point around, looking at your workforce and figuring out if the players do the job and all that, but it's not pleasant.
No. And be prepared for that. As HR, you never know how you're going to react each time you have to do it. And you are going to be the resource for the manager who is delivering the news. When we get to process, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. HR, don't put yourself in the position that you are the one that is giving the news. That's not your role. You are the resource. The manager is the person that needs to deliver the news, to say, you're no longer going to be employed with this organization. Don't take that on, HR. That's the manager's role. HR, you are there to then step in after the news has been delivered. You might be talking about the package. You might be talking about outplacement services. You might be helping that individual pack up their workstation. But you are not the one that's delivering the news that says you are terminated. And interesting enough, you've got to be very clear, and you have to coach your manager that they've got to be clear with that news. So as we work through that step in the process, you will get a little bit of practice on, so how are you going to say that? What are you going to do? How should you approach it? So we're downsizing usually because of two reasons. One is economic, that's been brought up, and the other is maybe a performance management issue. You'll notice that I'm not going to address today if there is just cause, and that means that the person has been dipping their fingers into the cash and gets found doing that, all right? This is two different situations. So number one, for economic conditions, when I'm working with senior managers, I'm encouraging them to be honest with the employees. Let them know if we're having financial difficulties. The news can be delivered in many different ways. But you do need to keep your staff apprised of how the business is doing. On the reverse side, when your business is doing well, share that with your people. You'll find your people will be more engaged with you if they know what's happening in your business. Okay? Secondly, always be training your managers. Helping your managers be better people advisors. Do your managers know who those A and B players are? So that when you do have to lay off individuals, the first place you look is maybe getting rid of those C and D players. Great opportunity for you to move those people out of the organization because maybe they're not meeting your culture, maybe they're not meeting your performance. Whatever your needs are, they're just not there. Okay? So those are a couple of things for you to think about strategically as we address this topic this morning. Performance management issues, it's a little bit more structured. You've got to sit down and talk to people if they're not meeting your needs. Interesting enough, don't assume they know. You'll find some folks just don't understand that they're not meeting your expectation. Some of your managers don't deliver the news in a way that it lands with the individual appropriately. Coach your managers to be very clear with people when they are not meeting expectations, and then put a plan in place. This is what we expect. This is the behavior we want to see that's different. This is the timeline that we would like to work on this, and then meet with them periodically. It's not just a one-time meeting. Let them know when their behavior's changed and you like that. Be very clear with them. Rhonda, that's what I'm looking for. That's the performance that we want to see on a go-forward basis. After you've got together with them and discussed the performance management issue, it might lead to further documentation so that they are clear. Again, give the news to them in a different method. You know yourself, sometimes you don't capture everything when it's just oral conversation rather than when it's written. Okay? So two different ways that we're going to talk today. Always, folks, go to the legislation. Have a look and see at what's in employment standards. That is your responsibility in HR. You are the resource there, and your management team is expecting you to keep them out of court. That's nothing that senior managers want to have happen. So check a couple of clauses in employment standards. One is the termination of employment, which we will highlight, and the second is the termination pay. When you are thinking about having an employee separate from your organization, I encourage you to think about these three questions. Number one, have we been fair? Do we treat everyone in the organization the same way? We don't want to be seen as having favorites. That is not an employer of choice, and that's not where you want to be. So be thinking, did we help this employee the best that we could? And now it's time to separate this employment relationship with them So now, are we going to handle them the same as we would someone else? Trust me, people will talk about their severance packages. They aren't supposed to, but they will. And so that's why question number one is important for you to think about. Are we handling everyone the same? Did we come to the process of we're going to terminate this individual in a fair process? And then lastly, are you handling the individual with dignity and with respect? Okay? A new process that is occurring out there is that some organizations are adding a clause to their employment contract. And that clause focuses on termination. So that you're very clear as to how you are going to calculate the termination, if in fact should happen, and that's written in the contract. That's a choice that you have, but just be aware that that is a practice that is occurring in industry right now. And this is where I'd like you to have some conversation at your table. Constructive dismissal is a topic that I'd like us to have a little bit more conversation about. What is constructive dismissal? It's when an employee views that you as an employer are not treating them respectfully and you've made some changes to their particular contract that they have with you. Any of the areas that are listed there, you've got to be aware of in your day-to-day work with individuals. Are you demoting anyone? Are you reducing their pay or their benefits? Are you forcing them to resign or take early retirement? Are you forcing them to transfer to a different area of the company and changing their responsibilities and their duties? If you do any of those, I'm not saying not to do them, I'm just saying be aware that if you are not communicating with your staff, that you could be found to be conducting constructive dismissal. So at your tables, can you talk about some situations in your workplace where you in fact have had to demote an individual, maybe from a manager to an employee, or where you've had to reduce people's pay or their benefits? Have discussion around your table, and we'll share the discussion a little later. Were you involved in any of these? When you were, how did you handle it? How did the people feel that were involved in the situation? I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to have that conversation. So away you go. Constructive dismissal. Come up with some examples in your group, and then we'll have a larger conversation.
So I've always seen the other side of it, because I'm from the financial side, so I don't.
Let's start over here with this group. So what did you talk about? Have you experienced, been on the end of constructively dismissed, or were you an HR practitioner? What were your conversations?
For myself, there's two situations. One was a reduction in pay and benefits, and that was simply based on economics. We had so much revenue coming in, revenue fell off, therefore we have to downsize. We have, different shifts that it affected all of them. So you do that as fairly and equitably as possible. And of course, they're forewarned like months ahead of time. This
Good.
is where we're at.
Good.
It's not looking good comparative to other years, blah, blah, blah. And then before the said time, I usually give them about 3 weeks notice in writing that this is what the new schedule will look like, and this is the decrease in hours.
Right.
The other one is one based on performance, and that's a headache. But said individual worked different shifts, did better on nights where there's nobody around. But again, letter of expectations, oodles of training opportunities, oodles of mentoring, coaching notes. And we're just at the point that no matter what we've done,
Yes.
you're still falling short of the mark.
Yeah.
measured by all of your peers and colleagues in
Yeah.
the same industry, and we cannot continue this.
Exactly. A decision
So
has to be made.
Absolutely, and it's like you are a liability, and I cannot continue.
Exactly.
So
Think of all the
improve or-
time you've invested in that person. What I find intriguing with workforce is, do you know how much time you spend with the good people?
Very little.
Very little. Think of the energy and the time you spend with those individuals that are causing the problems. You feel better in HR when you get to deal with those positive people. So at some point, as long as you've got it documented, as long as you've spoken to the person, you've offered them some help, if they still aren't meeting the need, then you know what? You make a decision. You handle them respectfully, but away they go. Okay? Other points around the table. Anybody? Pam, do you want to add anything?
We talked a little bit about the fact that sometimes when you're doing mentorship or performance management, the person interprets that as bullying or harassment. And so, and then we also talked about the fact that sometimes corporations will want to avoid lawsuits, so sometimes they'll be a little shy about persisting in the action, feeling that they're going to want to pacify the person. But
Right.
it doesn't create a very happy workplace when you've
No.
got people getting away with really poor performance and the managers are not empowered to give them constructive feedback that they need.
Exactly, exactly. Have you ever noticed that if you change one person in your workforce, what a difference it makes? That one individual who has been causing the problems, if you actually get them to leave the organization, things get a whole lot better. It's not easy, and I'm not saying that, but it is something that needs to be addressed, and when you are dealing with people, you have to expect it. It's just, you've got to cover off the correct practices, and you've got to ensure the person understands. Okay, this table here, do you want to share a couple of ideas, things that we spoke about? And make sure you use the mic. Rhonda, do you want to talk a little bit? I'll get somebody else to talk.
So we had maternity leave. During the course of her maternity leave, the restructuring happened, and when she came back, we had to bring her down the level into a different position. So we went about that with looking at what her strengths were, what she liked to do, and presented her with a new position that would support her strengths in a better area from where she was. We got lucky, and she
She liked it.
she was very happy in
Okay.
it. She is very, very happy with the new position. So.
Yes, and that's the other thing, is when you're working in HR, sometimes you talk yourself into how is this employee going to handle it. You really don't know, but our psyche takes us there. Oh no, this is going to be a really bad experience. Then you actually have the conversation, you're surprised to see that, the person actually is happy with what we've done. As people, we do that to ourselves. It's self-doubt, it's self-talk, right? So you want to be cautious. Don't always think the worst is going to happen. Pam?
The flip side of that is a colleague of mine went on a medical leave, came back, and her position had been eliminated. It wasn't really eliminated, but they said it was eliminated, and they gave her a position that she couldn't be successful in. It didn't match her skills. They didn't do that matching of skills. So she wound up leaving and won her lawsuit for constructive dismissal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else at this table here want to add in a few more things about constructive dismissal? All of these practices can in fact happen. It's how you handle it in your organization, okay? But just be aware that if employees take this to court, quite often the judge will decide to support the employee. So the employer will have to pay, all right? And usually it will cost quite a bit of money. So be very aware. If we're going to, and I've been in organizations where we've had to give the news about turning back salaries. It's a fact in Calgary. When you are in HR right now, you have probably had to take a cut in pay. It's all in how do you handle that communication with the employees. And being fair to employees. It's the manner that you are using to have conversation with people. Okay? All right, so we just wanted you to have a little bit more understanding of constructive dismissal. It's a term that is circulated a lot, and you should be thinking about it when you are having to do any of those particular practices to avoid getting yourself in court. Okay, so do you provide reasonable notice? Again, you've got choice. In this particular area that we're talking about today, as an employer, you have got some flexibility with how you handle these situations. In reasonable notice, what does that mean? There's two pieces of payment. One is, from the time that we give you the notice that you in fact are not going to be working with our organization anymore, it's one amount of money. The other amount of money is called severance, and that's what you're paying an individual if they sign off on the release. And that money is to be used for that individual when they're looking for their next place of employment. And there's a lot of factors that go into both of these type of payments that I'd like to spend a little bit of time with you. When you are terminating someone and there is just cause, notice the point. You do not have to give reasonable notice. So that could be me asking Pam to come into my office with whoever the manager is and saying, Pam, today is your last day of employment. And we do not have to give her any money to cover a notice period. The notice period is always listed in your employment standards. It'll tell you how much notice that you should be giving employees. And it's usually based on the time that they've spent in your organization. Okay? So that's reasonable notice. Don't have to do it for just cause. If you don't have an employment contract, and some of you don't, with your employees, you don't have one, and just cause is not the reason that you're terminating them, then you should be giving reasonable notice. Now you can handle it in one of two ways. You can pay people that amount of money, whatever it is, and you can still say to them, Tina, today is your last day, but she will receive that payment, okay, to cover off whatever the reasonable period is. All of this, again, is identified in your employment standards, so just make sure you reference that. If you are a manager and you are terminating a manager that reports into you, again, go to the employment standards and have a look and see what's the time frame or what's the amount of money that we need to pay. Normally it's listed in weeks. So it'll say for years 1 to 2, you need to give a reasonable period of 1 or 2 weeks of salary. Okay? So it's normally listed in regard to time. That's what reasonable notice is. Just ensure that you've got yourself covered off there. Let's talk now, the same day that I am giving that notice to you, that you are no longer going to be employed at the organization. These are some expenses that you need to be thinking about and some calculations that you need to do. This is the planning piece that I was referring to. Have a look and see, have they been reimbursed for their expenses? If they haven't, that reimbursement should be paid promptly. You may not know if you owe them any expenses. Then make sure you give them a time frame. Submit all your expenses to us by a certain period of time. Secondly, do you owe them vacation pay? That should be, again, paid promptly. Third, whatever day they worked to, again, work with your finance or your payroll folks and ensure that that payment is prompt. Your reasonable notice is something that we've already spoken about, and then the severance amount is a separate payment. So ensure that you've got all your financial house in order when you are getting ready to lay off or to terminate an individual. Severance amount is handled in many different ways. It can be a lump sum, and if you are going to do a lump sum, usually the qualifier is that the individual will need to sign off on the release that you've given them in the package. If they sign off on the release, then you will start to make payment on the severance. Another practice that you should think about and talk to your senior management team is about the benefits. If we're giving a severance of 1 month or 2 months, are you paying them for the benefits to be covered for that same time period, or are you extending the benefits? That's a choice. I caution you about extending benefits. So the severance package, let's say, is 2 months. I encourage you to think about paying to cover benefits for 2 months rather than extending it. Why? If they all of a sudden come back and tell you that they are disabled, makes things very messy. Very messy. So that is why you might want to think about giving a payment to cover the benefit period, which will be the same as the severance amount. A lot of things go into calculating severance, and I just want to put some things out there for you. Number one is, what level of position did the person hold? If they were in management, then the severance should be higher than if they were an employee. It's just the level of responsibility that they had in your organization. You also need to start thinking about age. How difficult is it going to be for them to find employment? If they're over the age of 50, I always encourage HR teams to add more severance to the payment. Because whether we like to think it or not, there is ageism out there. So employers are not necessarily hiring people over the age of 50. Even though there's all that wisdom, even though there's all that experience, some employers are saying, we'd rather hire someone who is just starting in their career. So I don't know if there's anyone else in the room that's over 50 other than myself, but that is something that you want to be thinking about when you're calculating a severance. And what I tend to do in organizations when I've been involved in severance packages is we add 2 weeks to the severance amount if you are over the age of 50. Okay? And that's just to have a best practice. Nicole?
Could I interject?
Sure.
So, absolutely, over the age of 50, and I would encourage you to think about 45, even 40. Within the economic situation that we're in, I can tell you that I know a lot of professionals at that 40 level, and it's no different than being 60 or being 55. So I just got a curiosity. Why do you think that organizations may prefer to hire somebody with no experience versus a 45-year-old?
The reason I can see that is somebody who's starting on the industry, they're very green. You can train them and mold them almost the way you want. They don't come with bias and opinions, as well as they are more cost effective than somebody who has all that experience. So you get a win-win that way, where you have somebody who doesn't cause conflicts, they'll go with the flow, they'll be around for a long time, versus somebody who may has their own biases, and because they have a lot of experience, they come with a higher cost to employ them.
Absolutely. I've heard the expression that makes me cringe. This individual has more runway than you do. So think of ourselves as planes and then figure out how long it takes us to take off. And there is one more point why it's better for some organizations, some companies, to hire somebody with less experience. It's less costly. And so you can hire two for the price of one, particularly in benefits. So we need to understand the reality of what's out there. So I just wanted to jump in
Thank
for
you,
that.
Nicole. Yeah, that's great. I want to draw your attention to the last point. If you have lured someone from another company to join your company, and now you are terminating them, you have to add more money to your severance. Yeah. Sometimes people don't understand that. So when you are encouraging someone to leave an organization and join yours, they join yours and now it hasn't worked out. Now you are having to sever them. You need to add more money into the severance amount because of that. Okay? Questions on that? Length of service, how long have they been with your organization, will be a factor in regard to how large the severance is. And also, how difficult is it going to be to find alternate employment? Those are all factors that your senior leaders are going to expect you to come forward with and say, this is the amount of the severance that we think we should be offering. Okay? If you don't want to pay a lump sum severance, I've handled it a couple of different ways. We've also put a clause in the severance letter that if in fact you engage in activity looking for your next job, if you find employment, then we're going to stop paying the severance at that point. So you need to talk to a lawyer and get advice. Make sure you've talked to them before you make decisions like that. There's always business nuances that come into place, but I want you to be aware that that's a practice that occurs as well. The individual has to have landed the job, though. It's not just that they're out there looking for work. Okay? So you can handle severance payments in a few ways. Any questions on payment? So there's reasonable notice, and then there's severance. The letter, the termination letter itself, be very clear that the person's employment has ended. That needs to be the first statement. After that, the person might stop reading, but at least you've been very clear with them that their services are no longer needed at your organization. Talk to them about the dollar value that you're going to be offering to them. Move into what you want to do with property, because remember that sometimes the day you plan your termination discussion, they're not going to have all of the property of the company in the company. It could be at home. How are you going to get that returned to you? Is it of value, and do you want it returned? So be thinking about the property, okay? The benefit allocation I've checked or talked about already, and then the release that you're going to give them should also be part of the package. Something that I'd like to plant with you is when you are doing these conversations, so the manager has called you in and it said to you that you're terminated as of today. What do you think that person hears after that? Zero. They don't hear a thing you're saying. So as an HR practitioner, what you want to do is you just want to ensure that they know what is in the documentation and that they can call you back. Don't sit there and go through all the details with them. That's a very painful process, and that's not the respect that you should be offering them. Think about yourself if you were given the news that you were terminated. Would you want to sit there and go through every paragraph of that termination letter? I don't think so. So highlight what's in the letter, highlight dates of when they have to return things, and then encourage them to call you. The release itself, again, make sure you consult with your legal counsel, is going to identify what the amount of the severance will be. It will highlight many different things, but two things in particular is how important it is that confidentiality be maintained. I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. In the document, it's going to say that they are supposed to be not talking to anyone in the organization about their severance. In reality, there will be conversation about it, and you are going to have to manage that. That will be your professional conduct and how you deal with that. But be aware that there is conversation. The layoff process itself, we're going to go through this You are going to terminate each other. You're going to practice. I'd just like to highlight a couple of things for you. Number one, the manager and the HR resource have got to be together. The manager doesn't feel any better than you do. So be ready for those emotions to come from that manager. Coach them through it and be supportive. So you have got to coordinate with them. You are helping them through the entire process. Number two, select a neutral meeting place. Please don't have it done in the boardroom where you've got blinds and the blinds are wide open. Be thinking about the other people that are walking up and down the hallway, checking out what's going on. But be also aware that you need to have it in a very closed environment. The door should be shut. Number three, the meeting itself doesn't take long. It takes 3 minutes for the person, the manager, to share that you are no longer going to be employed at this particular company. HR, it should take you only 5 to 10 minutes to finish the rest of the conversation. I am also contracted to some of the large outplacement organizations in Calgary. And when we do layoffs, like Nicole was referring to, so when we have 500 to do, when we have 300 to do, they bring in a lot of folks like myself. What it is, it's a schedule that's set up in Excel, and we have 20 minutes per person. That's it. One of the last ones that I was involved with, we were laying off 240 people in that location. You have to treat people with respect. And that's the key, is that you want your managers to understand that, because they aren't used to this. This is a really bad part of the job. As HR, you want the manager to come in, have the 1 minute, 2 minute conversation, and then they leave. You are there then with the individual. You go through the highlights of what that package is all about, and then you walk those individuals out. It depends on the organization as to whether you're walking them. Now, some individuals might not be able to drive because they could be emotionally upset. So make sure you've thought about that. Do we have taxi jets to take so that they can come pick their car up later? What are we going to do about all their possessions? Because people don't come to your meeting with their purse, their coat, and all of their belongings. Who's going back to that work station to pick up those personal things? The one organization that I was alluding to that I was involved with just this last fall is we had to walk people down to the parkade because they had parking pass. So we needed to walk down there with them, all right? I needed to have the conversation with the people as we walked down. Remember, we only had 20 minutes per person. So at the end of the day, did I feel awful? Absolutely. We all did, but we tried to think about the person. What's most important is we want that individual to feel that they were handled with as much respect as possible. Now, some people are going to shock you. When you give them the news that they're going to be terminated, it's going to be, yes, I'm out of here. Thank you. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Okay? So as I say, you never quite know what's going to happen. Retrieving the company property is you need to make sure also that you have turned the IT off as you head into that meeting. So there will be a few people know who's going to be terminated prior to the meeting taking place. And one horror story that I want to share with you in the fall. One of the folks got a little anxious and turned all of the access to IT off at the beginning of the morning. So then what happens is when I go out to the washroom and I need my passcode or my pass card to get back in, and my pass card doesn't work, what does that tell me? I'm one of those people that's getting terminated today. That's not a respectful way of handling those people. When I go to the washroom and can't get back in is not the way to find out that I'm one of those folks that's losing my job. The other thing that occurred is, good for them, they worked on a new org chart. But you know what they did? They circulated the org chart before everybody found out who was going to be terminated. So by me looking at the org chart, I saw my name wasn't there. Again, not a respectful way of handling it. So you do need to do a bit of coordination from an HR perspective, and that is why I want to talk about some of these things and to bring them up to you so that you don't have to go through some of the things that I've experienced in my life. Yeah?
Questions with
Yes.
regards to company property or something that's owed to the company. So, you know, in our office, as an example, we provide employees the opportunity to use our photocopy equipment. So there's a cost per copy. Or say they've been given, you know, additional days off, for example, that they haven't, you know, that we haven't yet earned.
Yes.
So holiday time or whatever, and that's something that we grant to employees. They can take time off prior to actually accruing it. Are you able to, like, we would never do it, but for companies, are they able to kind of garnish the last paycheck if some of those benefits are still owed to the company? Or
Yeah.
how does that?
Yes, absolutely you can. Great examples is when the companies pay for your education. Usually there's a condition. We will pay for your opportunity to take a certificate. And we will pay for your tuition for a certain amount of money. But there will be a condition that you must be with the company for a year. So it may be that maybe that year hasn't finished. Then you're going to claw back some of that money. Absolutely. Yeah, you can do that. Be careful. Don't be nickel and diming. I've always encouraged senior managers, does it really make a difference if they don't pay us back the $42.52? Because I want us to be more professional than that. But in some cases, when you're paying for someone to go to a 4-year degree and you've paid tuition for all of that, that's a lot of money. That's a completely different situation, and you talk to people ahead of time. If we're paying for your tuition, this is what it means, this is the condition, and if you resign or if we terminate, then there's going to be a clawback.
And the second question I have is related to the release form.
Yeah.
So if an employee signs a release form and then they breach the terms of that release, so they you know, with regards to confidentiality or the non-disclosure, what are the options for employers if that occurs?
If you're going to follow up, because some employers just turn a blind eye, honestly, but if you're going to follow up, make sure you've got evidence. That's the key on confidentiality, not just hearsay, but that you can prove. So they've gone on social media, and you've got examples in social media that they've done that. And then you can certainly say that you're going to contact a lawyer and that you'll be in touch with them and go from there.
Yeah, because otherwise it moves into slander.
Yes.
And so when I was director of HR, I would always involve the lawyer from the get-go. And then this is the proof, this is the email, social media in those days was not so active. Now with social media, it's very easy to track.
Any other questions? Before you get doing the role play at your table? So, in groups of 2, oh, you get to work with me. Isn't that special? 2. I'm going to allow you to do, each of you, fill the role. First thing you're doing, you're going to be a manager, and you're telling that individual they're losing their job. How are you going to say it? What are you going to say? The second role play, you are the HR professional. You are coming into the meeting after the individual has been told that they are losing their job. What are you going to say to those people? How are you going to handle yourself? We'd just like to have you work through that experience. Okay? So away you go. Give you, again, 5 minutes for this, and then we'll talk as a group. So, do you want to terminate me? Okay. How we doing? Have you had time to terminate someone? How did the terminations go? Tell me from your perspective as a manager, how did it go? How did it feel? Manager, you terminated someone. Share with us. Or some questions you had when you were doing the termination, like, I wonder if if we can say this, or we can't say this, or we should cover this, or we shouldn't cover this?
I experienced a high degree of frustration primarily because it's a performance management issue and the individual is oblivious.
Yeah.
Complete denial.
Yeah, yeah, that'll happen. When you are the manager and giving the news, some things you want to think about, and HR as well. What time of the day are you doing this? Are you doing it as soon as they come in the morning? Are you doing it right before lunch? Or are you doing it at the end of the day? All of those things you should think. When would be the best to treat that person respectfully, but also think about the others that are left? Okay?
It would be better morning or night, because if you tell somebody in the morning and they leave, but they know something's going on, if you tell them in the afternoon, they're like, I just worked a whole day and now I'm let go.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what's better.
Yeah, a best practice is that you don't make them work the entire day. If today is the day you're getting terminated, you do it maybe before lunch so that you can escort them out. And then right after lunch, you bring your team together and you have conversation. This is what just happened, okay? When you're having that meeting about you being terminated today, if they were an A player, so it has nothing to do with performance, it could just be financial. Tell them. Let them know that. Sometimes in your terminations, folks, you will offer to give them a letter of reference. It really depends on the situation. There's many different reasons why you will terminate or lay people off. Those are things that you can certainly talk to individuals about. Okay? And start the conversation if you would like, so that everyone kind of knows where this is going. You've got some difficult news to share. Nice way to kind of start it. Okay? Now, also be ready, because there's been 3 situations that I've had that we weren't sure how the news was going to land. And the person was very emotional. It was in the manufacturing sector. And I had the police sitting outside because we weren't just sure what was going to transpire. And after we gave the news to the individual, they did leave and they came back to the facility. And they had a weapon. So, HR, you need to be thinking about all of these different things as you plan the process. Be thinking about who the individual is. HR, when you come in, you can certainly carry through with the package that you're going to talk about. I don't encourage you to let people go back to their workstation, because all the way back to the workstation, they're going to say, I've just been terminated, I've just been terminated, I've just been terminated. Avoid that. You drive the communication. So walk them out, take them to wherever the taxis come, whatever the situation is. Don't allow them to go back. Stay away from terminating on a Friday, because you don't know what the resources are in that particular area or location to help people if they would need some support. And I also discourage you from, if all possible, terminating in the month of December. So that's kind of a blackout area as far as I'm concerned when I'm dealing with HR, is that we don't want to be terminating people in the month of December. Okay? Questions on that? I hope what you got to experience is being a manager and delivering the news. And then also, HR, how do you pick the pieces up? Because you never know what's going to happen when you walk in the door. Always have that box of Kleenex. As they say, you never know. So we talked about the meeting and how it was going to go. Offer outplacement service if you can. Outplacement service is to look after the individual that's leaving in regard to counseling, in regard to resume and cover letter review, but also there's training that you can offer. And if you think the person is not comfortable with social media, that might be something that you talk to your outplacement firms about and say, do you do training? And can we get this person enrolled in a social media training session? Outplacement service is to help the individual get out there and get looking for their next job. Okay? Now, we've delivered the news, and I'm just setting the stage for Pam to come up. So we've delivered the news, and now it's up to you, manager and HR, to share the news with the rest of the team. A couple of ways you need to do that. One is you need to bring the team together and explain to them what has happened. Be very careful with what you say. You don't know if any of the people around the table are friends of the individual who was just asked to leave. So be professional and share the details that you can share. And then send a message around within the organization. You don't want someone coming up from the 4th floor to look for this individual and to be told by somebody they're no longer here. That makes you look very unprofessional as a manager and an HR team. So think about communication in 2 ways. How are we going to get the message across with the team that is affected? And then also in the organization, how are we sharing the news with those folks? This will start the process of healing. It's only the start, though. You never know how people are going to react, and so as a manager, HR, encourage that manager to be very visible the day that the termination happens. Don't let them go into their office and sit. They are going out with their team and checking to see how everybody is doing, because you never know how people are going to react to the situation. Okay? In my communication and in my coaching with leaders, I always tell them, most important thing to the individual sitting there left after the individual has been terminated, what about me? Am I going to be the next one that's terminated? So be prepared for that and put that into your communication, and do not promise no one else is going to be laid off if that's not going to be the case. Don't say that to yourself. Don't put yourself out there. Okay? And start looking for disengaged behaviors in the workplace after the news has come, because it will be there and it'll show up in different ways. So with that, Pam, I hope I've set the stage for you. Thank you for your time. I hope you got a few tips. And Nicole?
We've got a little bit of time for questions, so if there are any questions for Landis at this point. Any questions? If not, we're going to take a break, and then when we come back, Pam is going to take us into a different direction, but one that is, as we've observed at the talent pool recently, an unintended consequence of mass layoffs and what happens in an organization afterwards. So let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back.